All right, our speaker today is somebody who is very familiar to us and who always has some pearls, and he does it off the cuff. All right, here's Timber Hawkeye.
Definitely off the cuff. I have nothing planned, nor do I ever know what I'm going to say until it comes out of my mouth, which sometimes gets me in trouble, but perhaps not surprisingly enough, speaking here, everything from the moment I wake up to me sitting here right now kind of creates the narrative that I'm going to share with you. It's surprising. This morning, I drove a friend to the Santa Barbara airport, and on the way back, it took me through 154, Cachuma Lake, which is beautiful and typically is a reflection of my life as I lead it. It's very calm. It's just very tranquil, serene. And yeah, it's depleting, but so am I. But my life has not been that way for the last month. It's been more akin to whenever you watch figure skaters and they do that spinning in place really fast. That's what it's felt like. And I really appreciate Don's reading this morning about finding the one constant in life, which is God. And I even really appreciate the song just now about playing outside, because a few days ago I returned from backpacking the Wind River Range, the Cirque of Towers in Wyoming, which was beautiful. And if you look at all the pictures, you'd think I had a fantastic time, because it was stunning and gorgeous, and just it really puts Yosemite to shame. I hate to say, because I love Yosemite, but the pictures don't paint the whole picture. There were mosquitoes the size of hummingbirds. And after living in Hawaii for 10 years, this is freezing temperature for me. And so when we did the hike, I met up with a friend from New York. He flew to Utah. I drove up, picked him up, and we kept going. And he and I have been hiking together for more than 20 years. We go all over the world together, and we never hike hip to hip. That's one of the things I really like him as a hiking buddy, is we start out in the morning from the campsite, we take off, and I'm like, I'll see you at the campsite. And so we're all often miles apart. He's a triathlete. He's way faster than I am. So you do your thing, and I'll see you tonight. And at one point on this trail, I pull up to, so the first day was fantastic. We covered about 14 miles. It was beautiful. It was difficult, but stunning. And you're surrounded by all this beauty. And we set up camp by this lake, and it was just the most stunning, beautiful, picturesque experience. The next day, similar, except about 3 or 4 miles in, he hit it before I did, but a big patch of snow. I don't do snow. And so immediately, like my spirit died. Like I felt crushed. I like stepped through it, and at first I was like, okay, I'll just step where other people stepped, and I'll be okay. But I step, and like it goes all the way down to my hip, and I'm just like, oh, this. And I'm carrying a 40-pound pack on me. I'm supposed to be enjoying this incredible, beautiful surrounding, and I am cursing every moment. And it turns out that I caught up to him because he stopped to take a bunch of pictures. And mind you, he's like 60 pounds lighter than I am, but he's carrying 30 pounds more than me because he's got camera equipment on his chest. He's got the backpack, he's got the whole thing. I catch up to him, and he's not looking at me. He's taking pictures, and I come up, and he's like, "Isn't this paradise?" And he looks at me, and I'm in tears. Literally just broken. I've got nothing left, Brian. I'm like, I can't do this. And And this is on the heels of another experience prior to going to Wyoming of agreeing to dog sit for a friend of mine, and a wonderful dog and good friend, but his upstairs neighbors were so loud. And it was just like this turmoil of so much noise and so much chaos in what is typically a Kachuma Lake kind of blissfulness. And going back to what Don was reading this morning and what Brian was saying also about the one constant is trust. And so when I think about, if you've ever taken a yoga class before, and there are these challenging yoga poses that are about balance. So you're trying to do a tree pose. Well, when you do that, I remember the very first time I went with a friend of mine, her name was Anne. This was around 2001. And we go to a yoga studio, and we're doing this tree pose where you balance on one leg and you lift the other one and you put it on your hip. And anyway, the teacher says, find a focal point in front of you to focus on, and that's how you'll maintain your balance. Well, I focused on the friend standing in front of me. Well, if she wobbles, I wobble. So the focal point in front of you needs to be something steady, something unmoving. And I hear that, much like those figure skaters, when they do that spinning around and thing in one place, and then they come out of it all graceful, I turn around twice and I look drunk. It's ridiculous. And yet they do this spinning really, really fast, and they come out of it totally cool. And from what I understand, it's because they find one focal point to focus on. And as long as they stay focused on that, it's all good. The moment you lose that focus, or not to lose the focus, but you look away from that grounding point, you fall. I fell on the hiking trip when I lost sight of what was right in front of me and how beautiful it was, and that even the cold, even the snow, that was temporary. I lost sight of that, and I fell, and it broke me. I lost sight of the joy of being with this dog for a couple of weeks because of the upstairs neighbors. As Brian said, we sometimes all lose focus. And if your focal point is something that's not permanent, quote unquote, then when it shifts, you shift. And I was thinking about, well, what is the one constant in my life? Because as Don said, people leave, things change, laws change, environments definitely change. I can't begin to tell you how different Wyoming is from here as far as culture and people. And I was glad to only be there for one day before hitting the mountains. And I'm really glad to be back here. When you said, what are you grateful for? I'm like, California. So grateful for California. The one constant has been God. And on that really long drive to Wyoming and back, I was listening to an audiobook called This Tender Land. It's an older book, but it was wonderful. And it talked about these two brothers who were orphans, and they were raised in this really horrible environment, and everything that could go wrong went wrong in their childhood. And it kind of felt like my backpacking trip, from the snow to the mosquitoes. My tent broke, so I had to cut the trip short. My bladder for the water, like the Camelback thing, that busted. It was one of those things that's like, really? One more thing? And so in these children's lives, everything kept going wrong, from their parents dying to them being thrown into this orphanage where they were abused, to everything. And yet they kept being surrounded by these beautiful messages about God. But the kid was like, no, that's not my experience of God. So on the night that they escaped from the orphanage, he climbed up the water tower with a big bucket of black paint. And he wrote in really big letters, God is a tornado. Because in his life, God has been a really destructive force, not constructive, not loving, not kind, not giving, not forgiving, but unforgiving, like just brutal. And he carried that with him until he saw the beauty in everything that happened, even in the horrible things later in life, as things unfolded, as things did come together. So God's presence was always in his life. That didn't change, but his perspective of God changed. And I can relate to that so much because I grew up with so much, I don't want to say hatred, but just disinterest, maybe, in the God with which I was raised. That depiction of God was a God I wanted nothing to do with. But the God here at Unity, it's a very different God. It's a very loving God. And it took me a long time. I would say even that what drove me away from the religion with which I was raised, which was Judaism, and drove me to Buddhism, is I think one of the biggest appeal was that there's no God in Buddhism. I'm like, all right, that's like the Wind River Range without mosquitoes. Bring it. No snow, no mosquitoes. It's all the good without any of the bad. But I've mentioned it to you before that there is a God in Buddhism. It's just not called God. There's like a placeholder with just a question mark. And we make peace with not knowing. And that's something I lost track of with when I started to hike. I had this idea of what it was going to be like, but it's multiple days across, changing terrain and altitude. And I thought I had an idea of how it was going to unfold. We all have an idea of how life is going to unfold. And so maybe my focal point, when I think back on my life, anytime I was at most peace, wasn't when I knew what was going to happen. It was when my focal point was the question mark. Is when I remained curious and said, I don't know what's going to happen next. Let's wait and see. Let's take another step. Oh, there's snow. Okay, but this isn't the end of the trip. Just keep going. And after a while in the snow, of course, came back down. There was no snow. And my friend, I got back from this trip, and the friend who's been living in this apartment that he loves that I hated because of the upstairs neighbor said he just bought a place and he's moving. And I'm like, yes. And I left Wyoming and I said, yes. And I don't know, I didn't know what I was coming back home to. And I live in an area that's really, really quiet. But last night, I don't know what was going on. I don't know if it's the county fair nearby or something. It was far from quiet. There was like a marching band until like 1 a.m. I was impressed, really, to be honest, that they could go for that long. And I didn't get any sleep and all that. And yet, that's okay. Like, what creates my anguish is never what's happening. It's a thought that this shouldn't be happening. That's what creates a suffering. There shouldn't be snow. You're at 13,000 feet. Why shouldn't there be snow? Like, why are there mosquitoes? Why wouldn't there be? Like this notion that I have an idea of how things are going to unfold plays right into the concept of play and humor and laughter, because all I can do is just laugh at myself. When my tent broke, that's what I just laughed. I was like, of course it broke. Considering everything else that's happened, why wouldn't it break? And I made it back and everything's okay. And my friend stayed back and he did a whole other loop. And he's back in New York. I'm back here. And much like the character in the book, I realized that God is not a tornado. But I can very easily mistranslate God's message as destructive or look at it as beautiful and healing. I just have to take myself out of the equation, if that makes sense. I have to remove myself from the center of the universe in order to admire it, because from where I'm standing, it can be a really ugly place. But it isn't. And if I can be miserable on top of this mountain, in one of the most beautiful places I've ever seen, then I know that my happiness, my joy, my peace has nothing to do with what's going on around me. It has everything to do with what's going on within. And Buddhism is often criticized for being really selfish. But working on making this peaceful contributes to it being a more peaceful world. Because otherwise, what I'm bringing into the world, what I did to my friend when I pulled up to where he was on the trail, he said, "Isn't this paradise?" And I was in tears and I said, "This is hell." But it isn't. It's his paradise. It's my hell. It's neither. It's both. It just is. And that question mark is what I lost sight of. So I don't want to say I lost sight of God or I lost sight of my trust or my faith or any of that. I put too much, I don't know what the right word is, too much stock maybe in my version of things and lost sight of the question mark. So let the mystery be is the source of joy, if that makes sense. I don't know if I'm making any sense, but it was nice to drive by Kachuma Lake today and not feel like I'm spinning. And I pulled over because I had already emailed Brian. I said, I may be late, but I will be here. And I thought I could take a couple minutes to pull over and and it sounds silly, but like bow to the lake. Like, thank you for being here in your calm, serene self, just waiting for me to come back home. And it's really good to be back home. And home is not where I live. It's you guys. It's this community. It's this unity. It's this, we all leave here and we all go into our tornadoes. But maybe this is where we come. In my job, I often am called to hold up a mirror for people and go, look what you're doing. And this place does that for me. It holds up a mirror for me and go, look what you're doing. Look, you put yourself instead of God in the center of the universe. You silly rabbit, And it doesn't come with any judgment. It comes with an invitation to keep coming back. So thank you guys for continuing to come back.